Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MTGO Traders. My name is Taryn, and this is Rivals of Ixalan preview season for January 2nd. Alright, so I feel a lot better today thanks to the sickness, but my voice is a lot worse. So bear with me, we're going to try and get through these as quickly as possible. I did want to talk about them because we have some ridiculously fun tribal cards, as well as just some great overall standard cards in today's spoiler list. But of course, before I get into it, make sure to like the video if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us out, helps us know you care, and keeps this channel growing. Alright, let's get right into it. We have Merfolk Mistbinder, a 2-mana 2/2 Merfolk Shaman. Other Merfolk you control get +1/+1. This is a godsend for us. Merfolk Mistbinder is an amazing lord for us. We were really thinking that we might just get like a 3-mana 2/2 lord for us in the actual format, but this is actually making it a standard playable lord that's going to be buffing our Merfolk on our side of the field and being amazing overall. The only drawback, of course, is that this is a blue-green, so it does mean that Botanical Sanctums, you really want to kind of look into those. Right now, they might be spiking in price as soon as Rivals of Ixalan does go out, because I do think that Merfolk does now have a shot, finally, at being a top-tier deck in Standard. Moving up from this one, we have the Paladin here. Let me get to the translator real quick. We have Starving Paladin. This is a 1 and white creature vampire knight. Starving Paladin doesn't untap during your untap step, and whenever you gain life, untap Starving Paladin. So a great way to kind of have some synergy with other 1/1 life leaguer tokens, like with Legion's Landing, things like that. I do think the Starving Paladin is actually pretty good for that. Other than that, though, I feel like this will probably be a card you might want to pass over a couple times. I do think in draft and maybe in sealed, this will probably be a decent wall for us. But I do think that overall, in Standard, this might actually see some play, depending on how much life gain you do have with your mono-white token strategy in Vampires, or maybe a mono-white or black-white strategy with Vampires. We got to see how this kind of plays out in the actual meta, but I do think in draft and in sealed, this is kind of just a great 3/3 body that can actually block on turn 2. Next up, we have another card that needs to be translated here. This is Watery Ambush, a 4-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 Merfolk creatures with hexproof, and of course, you can pay for target Merfolk can't be blocked this turn. I'm really not that excited about this card. Paying 4 mana to have something unblockable is kind of bad. I really wish they would reprint cards like Rogue's Passage instead of doing something like this. I feel like this card is kind of a waste. Maybe in draft and sealed it might be pretty good. It does produce 2 tokens, and it does make them hexproof, and it does give you the option of making them unblockable. So I think it might be decent in draft, but I don't think you would see this anywhere else besides draft. Moving on, we have Ravenous Chupacabra. This card is ridiculous. This is a 4-mana 2/2 Beast Horror. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. This is a great way to gain some tempo, great way to get some board state, and a great way to destroy an opponent's creature for 4 mana. It's an uncommon, so you won't be seeing it as often, but if you're into black, and you're into black solidly in draft, the Chupacabra is a great double black offering here that kills a creature for you. I think that's awesome. Again, you won't see this outside of draft or sealed, but I think that won't matter. In Standard, this card will not see any play at all. Next up, we have Daring Buccaneer, a 1/1 mana 2/2 human pirate. As an initial cost to Daring Buccaneer, reveal a pirate card from your hand or pay 2 mana. This is some lore 1 mechanics if I've never seen one before. Daring Buccaneer is a fantastic way to get into the pirate tribe to reward yourself in draft, but I do think this will probably shine a little bit brighter in the Standard meta, where you'll actually have more of a Rakdos deck, or maybe a Grixis pirate deck, where this is like one of your 1-drops, getting in for 2 points damage on turn 2. Daring Buccaneer is fantastic, and I can't wait to see it in the Standard meta. Next up, we have Legion's Lieutenant. This is a 2-mana 2/2 Vampire Knight, and it's a lord as well. Other vampires you control get +1/+1. Legion Lieutenant, thank you for being a very good way to kind of make sure that even if we don't hit all the actual vampires in the tribe for the draft environment, if we get into Legion's Lieutenant, we actually still have a way to actually bump our board state. Pump our board state, not bump it. I do think this card is quite good in draft. I do think this card will probably see more play in Standard, trying to make some kind of vampire deck workaround. I do think making a token-based mono-white or black-white vampire deck with a Legion's Lieutenant making all the 1/1s 2/2s is quite good too for only 2 mana. So we will see this probably in Standard, and it's going to be quite good again in sealed and in draft. Next up, we have Zitalpa Primal Dawn. This is a 8-mana 4/8 Elder Dinosaur, legendary by the way. It has flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. If this card had lifelink, it would be insane. This is as close as you can get to an Eldrazi without your eyes getting wet. This card is just going to die to a cast out, and that's about it, you know. I mean, this card is going to be a blowout in the sealed and draft environment, obviously, if they don't have a way to answer this on the next turn or that turn. The only thing I can think of right now in the actual sealed and draft environment is Pious Interdiction and Ixalan's Binding. They can shut down this card. Let me know if there's any other ones that I'm missing at the moment, but those are two cards that actually can shut this down in white, but I'm not sure about the other cards as well, as far as the other colors. This card is ridiculous. It's not going to see any play in standard, but in drafted and sealed, it's going to be a blowout win sometimes for some players. Moving on to other rares, we have another card that needs some translating for us. This is Glorious Destiny, 3-mana enchantment with Ascend, and of course Ascend is if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. As Glorified Destiny enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1. They have Vigilance as long as you have the City's Blessing. So this is a fantastic 3-mana pump for all of our creatures. I think this will see play in the mono-white Vampires deck in standard, obviously. This is kind of where I'm seeing this going for the most part. This might see play in a black-white Vampires build. This might even see play in a Cat Tribal build as well. I do think this is a cool card for us. Getting the Ascend mechanic won't be too hard for us in the Cat Tribal and in the Vampire builds, so we do want to look out for this in the future. I do think in Draft and Seal, though, this card's kind of bad, though. I'm not seeing us getting into 10 permanents with a lot of synergy in Draft and Sealed, so this card might be a card you want to pass over. Next up for us, we have a card that needs to be translated again. A lot of cards need to be translated today. This is Path of Discovery, or Path to Discovery. This is a 4-mana enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. So basically it gives every single creature in our deck the explore mechanic, which is quite fun, and has the ability again to like pump our creatures on the board. I do think this will be fun in maybe a Draft and Sealed environment, perhaps. But I do think in standard this is just too much mana. I think it might be a build around card for like cool kitchen table strategy. I think I might do that for myself, probably for the streams. But I do think this is a card you might want to be passing up in standard, maybe be passing up in Draft and Sealed, unless you get into a lot of like low level creatures, and then you get into this guy or the Path of Discovery, and then you can kind of pump your entire board state when you play them out. I think that's cool. Next up here, another card that needs to be translated. This is Shrine Atlasar. This is a 5-mana dinosaur. If a source would deal damage to another dinosaur you control, prevent all but one of that damage. This card is kind of fun because it does mean that the enrage triggers do go off a lot on our creatures, and it does mean that our creatures do survive most of the damage that's output towards it. I don't know if we'll see this like in a standard dinosaur list. I do think in a like Draft and Sealed list, this will be a really cool 3/4 for 5 that does prevent most of the damage to our other dinosaurs on the board state. Of course, it's other dinosaurs, not this dinosaur, so if this dinosaur does die or gets attacked or blocks, then this one is going to definitely die. But if we have it on the battlefield and we have other dinosaurs on the battlefield, it would be really cool to have like this on the board state and kind of attack out turn over turn without really much like hesitation towards the damage towards your creatures. Again, I do think it's fun. It might be a card you might pull into in draft if you actually get it passed to you. I don't know if you want to keep this if it's a rare in pack 1, maybe in pack 3, honestly, but I think in standard it's probably not going to see any kind of play. Next up, we have Paladin of Atonement. This is a 2-mana 1/1 Vampire Knight. At the beginning of each upkeep, if you lost life last turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Paladin of Atonement. And when Paladin of Atonement dies, you gain life equal to its toughness. So I do like the ability here is when it dies, you gain life equal to its toughness, not to the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So it's a great way to like pump it with some green pump spells and then have it die, and then we actually gain a lot of life from it. I think that's really cool. I know a lot of players right now kind of looking at this with Argyle's Bloodfast, being able to like lose life and then pump this turn over turn. I think that's an interesting ability here, but I do think that overall, being a 2-mana 1/1 is just going to die to removal a lot, and that's really bad and kind of sad. But being able to gain some life back when it does die is okay for me. I think that's fine. I do think this might be a cool card in Draft and Sealed to get into for your rare, if you're going into the Vampire Tribe. I don't know about this for a standard deck. We'll have to just kind of see what happens here. But this is definitely a card you kind of want to like kind of figure out and kind of build around and see if we can get into something that's more interesting. Moving on, we have another Merfolk here. This is Seafloor Oracle, a 4-mana 2/3. Whenever a Merfolk you control deals damage to a player, or combat damage to a player rather, draw a card. So this is a fantastic way for us to get some extra card draw and have a Merfolk as well. I think in the Draft and Sealed environment, this card might actually be okay. It does draw you cards. It is a 2/3, so it isn't that powerful, but being a 3 toughness is actually okay for a 4-mana. I think the combat damage to a player is the key here. If you're playing a blue-green like tempo Merfolk strategy in Draft, I don't know about a standard necessarily. I think this card's a little too expensive for standard, but I do think in sealed and draft, if you need like a 13th or 14th pick for a Merfolk, this is probably going to be it. Next up for us, we have Jade Light Ranger, a 3-mana 2/1. It's a rare. When Jade Light Ranger enters the battlefield, it explores, then it explores again. So this could be a possible 4/3 with exploration, or maybe draw you 2 lands or draw you a land and explore, being a 3/2. I think if you open this in your pack 1, pick 1, or pack 2, this might be a great way to like tell yourself to go get into Merfolk. Jade Light Ranger is a fantastic way to kind of make sure that your mana base is kind of like either filling itself out, or you're just going to get a 4/3 for 3 mana, which I think is quite good. Honestly, I wish it was a 2/2 that turned into a 4/4, but you know, you can't have everything. I do think Jade Light Ranger is a fantastic card for us. I don't know about fitting into the Merfolk slot now, thanks to all the great 2-drops that the Merfolk tribal deck does have for us. Maybe into a new Explore mechanic deck when Rivals of Ixalan releases. I think there might be a new blue-green Explore mechanic deck, or blue-white perhaps, or something like that. We definitely want to look into that in the future. I do think Jade Light Ranger, though, is a fantastic rare for us in draft and sealed, though. Next up, we have Kumena's Awakening, a 4-mana enchantment with Ascend. Of course, Ascend is the 10 permanents thing. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. If you have the City's Blessing, instead only you draw a card. I think in draft and sealed, this card might be actually insane and will just win you the game, like eventually outright. I do think in standard though, this card is going to be like maybe good in like a weird like Esper like hidden stockpile deck where the opponent just takes forever to win the game. But that's one of the things where we just kind of have to wait and see. I'm not really sure about that. I do think Kumena's Awakening, though, is kind of funny and kind of super good in the right deck in standard. Next up for us, we have Induced Amnesia. This is a 3-mana enchantment. When Induced Amnesia enters the battlefield, target player exiles all cards from his or her hand face down, then draws that many cards. And when Induced Amnesia is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return the exiled cards to their owner's hand. So this is a fantastic card to kind of shut down an opponent who's been tutoring cards into their hand, maybe in drafted and sealed, or maybe in standard. I do think this card overall, though, is kind of terror bad. This card might see some fun play in like modern if you want to be like a super mean person to like someone who's been like kind of like putting cards in their hand over turn over turn. Induced Amnesia is kind of a weird card. I think from a flavor perspective though, I really don't like this. As far as Jace wiping her memory, I think that's dumb. But you know, I think overall this is probably a card you want to pass over as far as being just a junk rare in drafted sealed. Next up, we have a red card here. This is Talani's Summoner. This is a 2-mana human with Ascend. Every time Talani's Summoner attacks, you may play X in red, and if you do, create X 1/1 elemental creature tokens tapped and attacking. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step unless you have the City's Blessing. So this is a fantastic way for us to gain the City's Blessing for one, or to just have a ton of cards attacking out onto the battlefield on turn 3. I do think this is kind of like a red deck wins card that's like an all-star card. There are so many good red cards in standard right now, it's kind of insane. And this card is just another one of them that's just like, man, how can you just pick? There's just so many of them now. This card is super good. I think this card can almost win a game by itself in draft and sealed if you get it out soon enough. Just think about a turn 2 play with this. Turn 3 swing, pay 3, get 2 other swings in, get in for 3 points of damage, and then next turn do it again, and then have the City's Blessing by the end of that, and then like have those 1/1s on the battlefield for you. I think that's insane. This card is super good, and I hope it sees a lot of play. Next up, we have Admiral's Order, a 3-mana instant with Raid. If you attacked with a creature this turn, you may play 1 blue. Rather than paying this spell's mana cost, counter target spell. This card is kind of awesome, and I feel like it's going to see a ton of play in sealed, draft, standard, and maybe even modern, depending on what kind of matchup you're playing up against. I think this card is basically here to counter a Settle the Wreckage play against a like a Pirates deck, and I do think it's a great way to kind of counter an in-step like Glimmer of Genius or something like that from a energy strategy. Making a counter spell cost 1 blue mana is kind of insane, and having a raid trigger on it just means that like you're always going to have a 1 blue counter magic on a pirate deck. So I think this card is really good. I feel like a lot of people are undervaluing this card because the raid mechanic means that you basically are attacking into like a Harness Lightning or Settle the Wreckage or something like that. And that's not necessarily the case. I think this card is fantastic. I think it is a good way to kind of train a player to want to use removal before combat happens or as combat is happening. I think that's really interesting. And I do think that just overall this card is just a regular counterspell, even if you don't have the raid trigger. So I think both ways this card works, it's fantastic. So I think this card's going to be amazing. Moving on here, we have Ixalan Primal Storm, a 6-mana legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur. It's a 6/6, and whenever Huatli attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast a number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. This card is super dumb. Again, this is one of those cards where it's going to be basically a windmill slam pick if you're in draft and sealed, and it's going to like straight up win you the game if you get a single attack out with this guy. If they don't have a removal spell for this in draft and sealed, they basically just lose the game. It's stupid. I do think in standard this card might actually see some play because it is kind of fun, and it does have a great way of kind of like exiling cards and being able to play them, of course, without paying their mana cost, which does mean that it's an attack. So that does mean that it doesn't have to hit your opponent for it to go off. So even if it just attacks one time, it could get like an amazing bomb from your side or their side. I do think the 6 mana though does make this card a little bit on the high side as far as being played in standard, but dinosaurs could probably get there, so we'll see what happens. Next up, we have World Shaper, a 4-mana 3/3 Merfolk Shaman. Whenever World Shaper attacks, you may put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. And when World Shaper dies, put all land cards from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. This card is super interesting, and it's kind of a really weird ramp card. I think in like draft and seal, this card might actually be really fun at being able to ramp into like a larger creature you may have drawn into. But I think this card is probably going to see a lot more play in maybe standard with a weird standard brew with like some Embalm and Eternalized cards. I don't really see this card seeing any kind of play in like a Merfolk tribal deck, perhaps. It's just kind of weird for me. I do think probably the place is going to shine the most is maybe Commander, where it has a lot of great synergies, being able to get into a lot of mana really quickly. Maybe getting to do like cards like Sidisi, things like that, and EDH. I think that's probably the goal of this card, and probably where it's going to see the most play. Next up for us, we have Elinda the Dusk Rose. This is a 4-mana 1/1 legendary creature Vampire Knight with lifelink, and whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Elinda the Dusk Rose, and whenever Elinda dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elinda's power. So this is an interesting card for us. It's a 4-mana 1/1, so it does kind of like sort of have evasion on Fatal Push and other cards, but I do think one toughness here does mean that a Shock, Lightning Strike, Magma Spray, Harness Lightning, anything in red basically, anything in green, basically any kind of kill spell that does any damage to Elinda will kill it as soon as it's played, and that's kind of why I think this card is terror bad, but I do think if it's used in the right deck, maybe in like a Modern or EDH, it could be a really cool way to make a really cool vampire deck. I do think this card is actually going to see quite a lot of play in maybe an Abzan Hidden Stockpile deck, because it does mean whenever a creature dies, which means like another creature, which is any creature on your side or their side, I do think that's interesting to kind of get a revolt trigger kind of going and making a lot of 1/1s that way. Or maybe like playing in Elinda and then like kind of making some servos, making some +1/+1 counters on Elinda, then playing another Elinda, making the first one die, creating a lot of 1/1 white vampires. I think that's interesting. Or maybe getting into like a more Abzan strategy where it's being able to be pumped a little bit and then sacked because it's Elinda's power instead of the +1/+1 counters on it. And that's more interesting to me too, because you could actually pump this for like 4, you know, and then get it up to like a 5/5, then kill it, and then it makes it 5 1/1s instead of just like 2 1/1s. I think the card has a lot of like potential, but I do think the 4 mana here does make it quite hard to deal with. If it was a 3 mana, I feel like it probably would be a lot better, obviously. It may be a bit more viable. We'll just have to see what happens when it hits playtesting when the set goes live. Next up, we have a mythic here. We have a Time Stream Navigator. It's a 2-mana creature human pirate wizard with Ascend, and you can pay 4 tap it, put Time Stream Navigator on the bottom of its owner's library, take an extra turn after this one, activate only if you have the city's blessing. I do think Time Stream Navigator is kind of a fantastic way to like time walk for 4, especially if you're playing a more control-based or token-based strategy in standard. I'm not really sure about this for draft or sealed. I think this card is kind of a terrible card. It might just be a 1/1 for 2, honestly, in some matchups. In draft and sealed, but I do think in standard it does have some weird potential to be in some weird like combo deck or some control deck. And the last card for today we have is Huatli Radiant Champion. This is a green and white now, 4-mana Planeswalker, 3 loyalty counters, +1, put a loyalty Planeswalker on Huatli Radiant Champion for each creature you control, which is actually kind of really cool. -1, target creature gets +X until in a turn where X is the number of creatures you control, also very cool. And -8, you get an emblem with whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. I think the emblem here is quite good, I think the +1 is quite good, and I think the -1 is quite good too. The problem I have with this card is that it's really only going to be played in like a token-based strategy, and that's about it. I think this card really does benefit from an Abzan Hidden Stockpile strategy, or maybe a green-white like vampire-based strategy or a Oketra Monument strategy. I just don't see a place where this card would be good anywhere else but a token-based deck. Being able to +1 and maybe go up to 7 immediately or 8 immediately, I think that's really cool. We definitely want to see that kind of happen more often. But I think the -1 doesn't defend herself. It does pump something, which is kind of cool, but it doesn't give them trample or anything else, which is kind of bad. And the -8 is really good, and I think it would be super good in a token-based deck. So Radiant Champion, I think, is probably like a solid 6 in like a token-based deck, because it is filling up a slot that would go for something else. But I do think it's probably like a solid like 4 in like other decks. I definitely want to see this kind of be played in the actual meta when it's live, but right now I'm not really too hot on this card, other than just saying that it's probably only going to be good in a token-based deck. And that is the full list for today's spoilers. Let me know what you think. Did you like it? Do you hate it? Do you have cards you like really think that I'm like getting it wrong about? Please let me know in the comments below. I really hope my voice is healed by tomorrow. I sound like old rubber or something like that. I don't know what's happening. But I love you guys, and thank you for sticking around, and I will see you in tomorrow's preview video. Peace.